2006, Buttermilk Spore. I'm pretty sure... I meant to look it up, actually. I forgot. Buttermilk Spore... By this point, we're into Splish. By this point, you know... Splish, by the way, I think in the two short books that led up to Splish, the Zen Transference Manual and It Went Red, I think... Oh, and even right before that, we did the Aluminum Farm. I think that's kind of the turning point. I think that's when I lost a lot of people. You know? I think that's when people checked out on me. You know? Because I think up until that point, up until and including Scatter, I think I was kind of giving them what they wanted. You know what I mean? If they were songs, they would have melodies. If they were movies, they would have empathetic characters. Or if they were paintings, they would have bright colors. Or, you know, up until that point, I had people. And around 06, starting with that series of short books leading up to Splish, is when I started losing people. As it got more abstracted out, people started really checking out, I noticed. You know, and like people who had read my stuff for the first time never came back again. You know, like I noticed this sort of, kind of response. And the idea with Splish was I really wanted to create a whole new form of literature by that point. And what I was trying to do with Scatter, and the single version of Scatter, which ends with Tits and War, or T and W, that was like the analog or the acoustic version, because it was all, there's one little part where it's done off a computer, but the rest of it is all hand done. So it was like the analog version, and then we get into the digital version, you know, like it builds. And so Splish, so leading up to that, to Splish, was these shorter books, sort of showing like, well, it can go in this direction, these are dynamics of it, and then there's these dynamics of it. And I really wanted to use something in this compilation from Zen Transference Manual, but I just couldn't break it out. Those pieces I titled 1, 2, and 3, and I couldn't in good conscience separate them. It just didn't really work. So, the wife is back. Hi, darling. How you doing? Okay. Shut your door, dear.
No. I want to be kept awake.
We'll try to be quiet. We only have 5 more years left.
Okay.
Okay. Sleep good, darling. Good night, hon. So anyway, I had a really tough time picking something from 06, you know, because It Went Red is sort of one piece. Zen Transference Manual is sort of one piece. Splish is one piece. And the two things that came with Splish Supplement and Splish Reconsidered, are kind of one piece. So I had a really tough time split. So I ended up just taking the first thing in Splish, saying fuck it, well, you know. But I wanted to show that when Splish came out, I knew that it was going to be very unorthodox, and I wanted to show, like, no, there's a methodology to this, like going all the way back. What in Radar Grain, the modular style goes into the language shift stuff, goes into the full abstraction kind of linear thing with Scatter, goes into Tits and War, goes into the shorter book. There's a line of thought, like we are building to something with Splish, and Splish was going to be kind of like a whole new style of literature. It was going to be 21st century version of the cut up and the fold in. It was going to take that to the, you know, to the far reaches of what literature could even be. And so Buttermilk Spore is the first piece in there. We did that one, Tim and I did that one in Wisconsin. It was one of the first pieces we did up there. It was maybe, it wasn't the first, it was maybe like the second or third we worked on. I brought it back here and worked on it some more. I added about 40% more to it. Are we Okay. And so, I think it's emblematic of what Splish is about. I think it works kind of within the context of this compilation. If you're paying attention, you'll see. I think that series of short books, and I think Splish is really, really challenging and really, really awesome. I was willing to risk losing the audience for it, and I've never regretted it. Oh well, cleared the room. I figured it might go all the way over people's heads, which is why I put the titles in Splish that I did, and calling the stuff like My Sperm Smoke Crack and the Al Qaeda Pom Pom Gangbang Cheerleader Parade or whatever, you know what I mean? Even calling it Buttermilk Spore, it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. But, it had to be done. And I think the final result's pretty fantastic, so.
Absolutely. Agree.
Okay, 2007. Swim to the Center. It was originally called Swim to the Middle. And I felt that was a bit of too much of a title. And so I didn't like that. It started off, it was 3 words. And it just sort of grew from there. It's funny how these things get built out, you know what I mean? So it was 3 words and some lines, some parallel lines I drew down the page, and I just kept building it. And it was coming off of Splish. If you look at the whole of Swim to the Center with the 3 long pieces that come after it, that Splish is not the farthest out thing I did. Swim to the Center is. Swim to the Center is really challenging.
Yeah,
that's a real motherfucker.
It really is.
But the poem itself, Swim to the Center, I wanted, it's sort of the tease. I'm giving the idea of having a poem, but then it goes way the fuck out to Saturn, but the poem itself, if you actually look at it, doesn't add up. It's extremely contradictory, and structurally, it's way the fuck all over the place. Structurally, it's abstract as anything is Splish, if you actually pay attention to it. Because there's this opening section, and then it goes, and what part of what Swim to the Center is about, it's about a lot of things. But part of what it's about is about the generational divide. And one of the things I thought was interesting about the baby boomers versus my generation was we often said a lot of the same things, I think, in sort of our protest art, but there was never a point where it really seemed to connect from across generations. We kind of understood ourselves, they understood themselves, but there was this sort of disconnect where they would either be condescending to us or we would be dismissive of them. And I was always very confounded by that, because there's so much crossover in what people were saying. But it's almost as if people were alienated by the format of how people were saying things. Oh, I can't listen to that because there's too many fucks, shits, and pisses. Or, oh, the violence. Or, oh, the hippie humanism, or whatever, And I've always been fascinated by that. And that's part of what Swim to the Center is about. The other thing that Swim to the Center is about is it's about individualism. And individualism is, how do I put it? Individualism as activism. Not being a part of some group, not being a part of a mob, and not being part of a media creation. And Swim to the Center, the center can be anything you kind of want it to be, but the center, the center of the circle, you have to have something to hold the structure in place, and you can use that as a metaphor for any number of things. Yeah. And I'm not even going to touch that one. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't want to trample on people's stuff. But there's an aspect of there's a person that I'm actually friends with on Facebook now that who I have a pretty good amount of respect for, but as to paraphrase myself, creates a lot of crap that no one gets. And it's almost as if this person is afraid of actually communicating, you know? And so if this person stays esoteric, there's this like safety in being esoteric, just like there's a safety in being a socialist or a born-again Christian or whatever, you know? And so I'm not in a confrontational way, but I'm sort of calling that person out. Or people like that, you know what I mean? So are you going to create a bunch of crap that no one gets? Are you going to hide behind a group or hide behind a flag or whatever, you know? And then I think the end section is one of my favorite things I've ever done. I think it's really good, really distilled language. I think the ideas are really good. I think the ideas are really clear. And I was really proud of myself having written it. Because that was one of those things where it took a while to get to. It took me like a couple weeks of like every day. Like I think I might write it today. I think this might be it, and then it wouldn't be. You know, I think I got it. Yes, you know, or I would maybe get 2 lines, and then I would do like the next 2 lines or the next 2 lines after that, and they would be, I wouldn't like them, so I'd have to, oh fuck, you know, damn it, this isn't right, and I have to walk away from it or whatever, you know. So. Should we keep going, Tim?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right.
Were you done with that one?
Yeah. 2008?
Yeah.
I think. All right. I could have picked any number of things from 2008. I covered a lot of ground that year. I don't know. So I picked 1001. It was written one night. Liz and I were watching a movie, and I got a rhythm in my head, and I went into the bathroom as the movie was playing, and I had a piece of paper with me, and I wrote down the first, I think, like 4 lines or something, and I just sort of held on to it for a little bit, and then I started writing it out. And then I got into the whole Civil War idea, which the whole middle section is... it totally changes away from the narrative and goes into this thing from the point of view of this guy fighting in the Civil War, and sort of this dream sequence, and he imagines his death, and then he comes to, he's awoken by his brother, and then it goes into this declamatory death, you will not, you know, I take the trumpet out of your mouth, and it goes into that whole section, and then it goes into the sort of improv where it almost extends off of that, you know, there's the declamatory stuff about death, and then it goes from there into it's almost like the person saying that, it's almost like their kid or somebody related to them took over, because that part is like more brash, and there's a lot of little jokes in there in the first part, you know, and then it gets more serious, and once again, I mean, I put all these elements together. I don't think it's up to me to explain where there's shifts in time and shifts in setting and shifts in character and tone. I don't really give a shit about explaining that or trying to come up with a logical, well, this is clearly because of this. That's completely uninteresting to me.
That's a completely different trade.
Yeah.
Vocation.
Yeah. but that's kind of the outline of 1001. Once again, I don't know. I think the rhythms of it, I read Present Back a few months ago, and I was just so impressed with it, and I was really impressed with 1001. You know, I think it's just really, really, really just creative and really well put together, you know. And my thing is always kind of, well, could I have done this a few years ago, you know? And that's sort of how I chart myself, you know what I mean? Like how I mark where I'm at, you know? And I couldn't have done 1001 in 2000. I couldn't have written that in 1999. I wouldn't have been able to conceive of that. Just as in 1999, I couldn't have conceived of fear in 1994.
Because of the work that came before it?
Yeah, you know. and just the sense, and I think when all of this work is obviously very disparate and goes in a lot of different directions, but I think the thing that carries it together is I think there's a very clear sort of, I hope this doesn't sound fascist, but very clear line of purity that goes through all of it, because it hasn't been tainted by anything. Like, I haven't gone to like write a sitcom or something in the middle of it, and like I had to come back to do what I, you know what I mean? There's a very clear line, I think, that connects 20 years of material, even though it's gone and shifted in all these different directions, and I think it's because it's the same hand on the wheel the whole time, and I haven't gone, like I said, to go do some stupid activity with it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things, and I think ultimately, even though a lot of the stuff is written in character, I still think it's all my voice, even when it has nothing to do with me, and it's certainly not my perspective, and in some cases, it's nothing I would ever agree with ever. It's still coming from, it's still my fingerprints on it. So. 2009. Ooh, sorry. Did I fuck anything up?
No.
Okay.
Nothing's fucked up.
Okay. So 2009, MDC. Now, MDC is written about this guy named Tim who would turn on the air conditioning. No.
Air conditioning?
Whatever it was. I never called you that.
Where did it come from?
Most developed country.
I know, but...
Well, it's because you would, he like has the windows down and the air conditioning on in the summer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was always where I first heard of it.
That sounds right.
You're like the waste. He had
I had the air conditioning out of the dirt.
He had like 4 scoops of ice cream. Oh, the waste. His parents owned all these different types of paper products. Oh, the waste.
4 rolls of toilet paper at once.
Yeah.
Waste. Or you have to possess them all at once.
No, MDC has nothing to do with. Oh, you just got to hear an extended riff on an inside joke from the old days. But,
the voice.
Yeah, but no, it has nothing to do with. It has nothing to do with that. MDC is a dual reference. I will. Oh God. See, this is why I don't do this. I'm gonna give the game away here. It's a dual reference. MDC, as in the hardcore band, Millions of Dead Cops, also stands for Multi-Death Corporation, or Millions of Damn Christians. But the book present also has references to 2 other hardcore bands. There's a piece in there called Void, which is titled in tribute to the monumental genius band Void. And then there's a piece in there called Depression, which is in tribute to the Black Flag song Depression. So it's titled that way because it's related to that. But it's also titled that because MDC is short for the initials of the guy who killed John Lennon. So, MDC is, I think, one of the absolute best things I've ever written. It's 2 scenes. The second scene shifts perspective pretty dramatically. The first scene is a woman being stalked by a guy who she doesn't know that well. She knows a little bit. And that was just written. I was just thinking about, there's my first 2 childhood crushes were Natalie Wood and Debbie Harry. And I was thinking about my impressions of them when I was like 3 years old and 4 years old, the early 80s. And that somehow led into this idea of like, what if somebody had their telephone number? Not them specifically, but sort of that place and time. And what if somebody had got this woman's telephone number and what could possibly transpire if this person was ill-equipped to deal with reality or relationships. And so I just sort of wrote this sort of stalking scenario. It's set in modern times, though, ultimately, because there's stuff about private caller and, there's very specific references that don't have anything to do with the early 80s, And then it shifts perspective. When I was a kid, this also ties in. When I was a kid, my father told me stories about Mussolini. He worked with a guy who had been at Mussolini's public post-execution, where they hung Mussolini and his mistress up by their feet and naked, and people got their pound of flesh, and they stabbed him and punched him, and and this guy had Polaroids of it because he was there in the melee taking photos. And this guy brought these photos to work one day and was just showing my dad, and my dad was horrified, And so, but Mussolini had been captured. He was trying to sneak into Sweden. That's when they caught him. And so, this was in the, this was right after Bush was out of office. This was written in January and February of 2009. And I imagined George Bush as a European leader and being forced to leave office. Maybe he had collaborated with the Nazis. Maybe he had shared some secrets with the Japanese. Maybe he had given away some radar stuff, whatever, Maybe he had bet against Winston Churchill, whatever. But just this image of him and his family trying to sneak out of whatever country he was in. And he's apprehended by 2 guards, and they're pretty vicious with him. And you don't know if he's alive or dead by the end. They're taking him off to trial by the end. So these 2 soldiers are the 3 soldiers are pretty horrible to him. And then it shifts perspective. The camera pulls back, and you get the perspective of somebody who was down the road, hiding behind, a hill, watching the soldiers beat him. And he initially was somebody who would have supported an execution of this leader. But watching these soldiers be horrible, he starts questioning the entire thing. Why would we do this? And what is a leader? What is an enemy? What did we learn from this? Are we any better because we did this to him? And he just starts asking, watching this event take place makes him question the entire thing. As opposed to a rah-rah, or he's not even saying we've lost our way. He doesn't even know. It just fills him with questions. He doesn't have any certainties, burning certainties one way or the other. Even though he's ostensibly getting what he wants, this horrible guy's no longer in power, or whatever. So, the first half with the stalker thing is out of time. The it's 80s, but it's modern times. The second half with Mussolini / George Bush is out of time. These 2 things take place a continent apart. They're decades apart in both cases. 40s to now, 80s to now. They're both relatable out of childhood memories for myself. That being said, who knows what ties them together? And it seemed to be the most logical thing in the world to title it halfway a militant hardcore band like MDC, and then also, this alleged Christian who decided to shoot somebody in the back because he read something in the media that made him think that this guy might not be sincere, supposedly, while reading Catcher in the Rye, trying to be that guy. But being a Christian, trying to be like that guy. It made all the sense in the world to tie all of these things together. Once again, I could not tell you how. And as far as its writing, it was written over the course of about 2 or 3 intensive days. But in fast sessions, you know, I would write like a whole, like the first scene, the stalker thing, is 2 main verses basically, and each of those were kind of written more or less in one shot. I mean, it took like an hour each. You know?
Would you think about the form between sessions in that situation?
Shit, dude, I knew what it was.
Oh, okay.
It was so. It was really in my mind. The only thing I ever had to worry about, even with stuff like people, and the only thing that really concerns me is transitions.
Why wouldn't it all come out in one piece then?
Oh, that would be idiotic. With shifts like that,
Yeah.
you can't go from fucking milk to ketchup.
Yeah.
In one sitting. At least I can't. That would be very disingenuous. It's much better for me to like really focus on the fucking ketchup versus really focus on the lettuce or something. I don't like the idea of one to the other.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm going to put my energy into it, I'm really going to put my energy into it. So yeah, that's why that
makes total sense.
Yeah, and that's, like I say, that goes back to like what I've learned from Radar Grain onwards. You know, and whatever you want to call this style of writing, if you want to call it symphonic, I tend to call it symphonic, but you could call it modular, you could call it a lot of things. But yeah, I mean, when you're writing symphonically,
you call it this is symphonic. These portions coming together.
Yeah, and it's and not just that. It's not just related to that either. It's related to the whole thing. When I'm actually writing a section, you know, like a verse or something, it's within the verse as well. There are things happening within each line. I mean, there are interdynamics within each line, and everything's reverberating off of everything else, and then everything affects everything else.
Yeah.
And that takes the shape of this. And sometimes I'll be thinking of the first verse. I'll already be on the 4th verse, almost even subconsciously. Like I already know it.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'm connecting these other things, and there might be like one tiny little element in the first verse that I will then pull to the 4 for the 2nd and 3rd. Might change it a little bit in the 3rd. And it's just constantly being arranged, and there's constant like counterpoints to everything else that's happening. And it gets arranged and arranged and arranged, you know. So it'd be like, you know, it's almost like writing like 5 different parts at once.
Yeah.
You know, because I can hear and I can see all of these things taking form and shape.
They're all interlaced with each other.
Yeah. But leaving me room. But the most important thing is leaving me room to edit. You know what I mean? That's the most important thing.
Is that very difficult?
Editing?
Writing symphonically?
That's how I write. I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've taught myself how to do it. That's what I do. And I don't ever want to undo that. Ever. It would be the worst thing I could possibly do, creatively. Yeah. To undo that. That'd be idiotic. No. I mean, I write symphonically. I mean, that's what I do. Yeah. Because I think everything I was doing in the 90s was attempting to understand that that's what I did. You know what I mean? You know, I finally eventually fucking grabbed the reins of destiny. Like, this is what I do. You know? But what's funny is that once I understood that is when that's when I was able to fucking extemporize stuff like Live and Nude and Helpless, and you know what I mean? Like, understanding that that's how I wrote is what left me free to fucking do readings with no paper, no nothing. You know? Stuff that wasn't even written down. You know? I was able to do that because I could arrange and create stuff in my mind.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, I mean, I write symphonically. And it's so funny because when I started, you know, it changed everything. I mean, I every movie I've watched is different. Every painting I look at is different. Every song I listen to is different. You know?
Because you're going in first at the form, or
form and content. You know, I mean, I've used this example before, but you know, My Valoria by the Pixies, you could break that into component parts and make an entire album out of it. You could make a really great album. That's an album. You know, you could take that. But he wrote that symphonically. It's one of the most genius pieces of writing of all time. I would put that piece of writing up against anybody. Do you know what I mean? Like any of the greats, whatever. Because it's so remarkable. You know, and you could break that into component parts and totally build an album out of that one thing. You know, the first 90 seconds of it you could make an album out of if you wanted to. You know, not that I was thinking of it at the time, but I actually did that with Water. I actually broke Water down into an entire book. I have it somewhere in the drafts, in the downstairs in the cabinet, and it's the book version.
It sounded that way when you were describing it, when you were going through that one before.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, it can be fucking done, man. You know. So all right, 2010 Apocryphal Stories. 2010 was a horrible year. I created virtually nothing because it was impossible for me to concentrate. And as Perry Farrell said many years ago, to create something, to think past where most people go, you have to concentrate. And I really did not. It was all stuff out of my control, too. It's not like I was fucking up, you know. It wasn't like I was becoming an alcoholic or something. It was things that were way beyond my control. And by the end of the year, by November of last year, things seemed to be settling down. And I decided to just start writing because I wanted to start doing the book I'm working on now, Your Future, Your Freedom. And I just thought, well, I'll just write some stuff and kind of get, you know, I need to flex those muscles again because I haven't done it for basically a year, you know, and I need to just kind of get back on the horse. And I wrote one piece that was just kind of an open-ended thing, and then, god damn it, I wrote Apocryphal Stories, and I was like, this is great. This is, wow, holy, you know, who could have imagined I would come up with this? And then I started coming up with No More Burlesque. I was like, what the hell's happening, you know? And then I wrote White Apple, and I thought, oh my god, this is absurd. And this was not Your Future, Your Freedom stuff. It was related, but this was its own thing. And I couldn't believe the speed with which I was coming up with these pieces. So, but Apocryphal Stories is, I think it's beautiful. And I read it over the summer, and it went over really well. I think it's really, really, really beautiful, and it's a form that I've never used before. I mean, it's a completely new, structurally, it was completely new stuff for me. And so, because I was just sort of like, it really was an experiment, because I thought I was just starting fresh. And so I was like, well, I'll try the most outlandish kind of non-structure, but not make it like amorphous, but just, you know, well, we'll have it repeat this, and then, you know what I mean? Like, make like a fucking equation that doesn't add up to anything, you know? That's almost what it was going to be, you know?
Really?
And it was what it was. The original version of it was a little bit weirder and a little bit more skeletal. I actually filled it in, so it's more readable. I think it's much better in its second state, but the first version was still pretty interesting, you know? The first version was more of the, well, all right, well, let's see if I can have it A, B, B, A, Q, L, and, you know, like, whatever, you know. And it fucking happened. As for what it's about, well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It can be told here. Apocryphal Stories is a tribute. It's a sort of a love letter or a celebratory note about my wife's vagina. It's written about. It's a celebration of her vagina. I think her vagina is a really amazing thing. And so, and not, obviously, I mean, if you read the piece, it's not like, I don't mean this in any kind of like tawdry way, you know. But that's where, you know, it gets into the whole thing about the birth of Earth and, you know, the jungle sea and everything else. If you start to understand that that's what it's about, the rest of the imagery starts
Lots of sense.
starts making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And the you need all you can get has nothing to do with somebody wanting to like fornicate or anything with that. What that means is, how do I put it? My wife knows other females of her age, sometimes younger, you know, but who've never had an orgasm, and whose boyfriends or whatever have never been able to get them off, you know. And that's tragic to me, that it's 2011 and women are still sort of sexually kind of second-class citizens, you know. And there's girls who don't ever masturbate, don't even know how. They don't even, the clitoris is some sort of nether region that they, you know, don't really even explore. So the
myth.
Yeah. So the you need all you can get, that is not about like you need to get pussy. That's not what that means. What that means is that's my, how do I put it? That's my message to the women of the world, or the vaginas of the world, or the clitorises of the world.
Well put.
That you need all, like, you should be enjoying yourself. You should be able to get what you need. So that's what Apocryphal Stories is about, largely. I just tied a lot of other stuff in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just tied all these other aspects in there.
What are the other aspects?
Space and time travel, and I put a lot of other things in there. And what's funny is the one of the things I was talking about, the structure and the changes in the structure. One of the things that made it, I think, more readable and less bizarre and skeletal and angular was the stuff about you can see the birth of Earth, see it in black and white in reverse. Like, I think that made it more, you know, that made it easier to read and provided a bridge between the sections, you know, and it gave it a better flow and continuity. Well, I never would have come up with that had I not watched the Basquiat documentary, because they were showing some painting that he was painting, and he had written in one of the paintings "Birth of Earth," and I saw that and immediately, oh, that's going in Apocryphal Stories. So I came up to the computer after it was done, and I'm like "Birth of Earth," and I just had it written down on a little thing, and oh, well, that's the, for lack of a better way of putting it, the bridge between this and this. You can see the birth of Earth, see it in black and white, in reverse. Like, there it is. Boy, that fits perfectly, you know? So that's Apocryphal Stories.
Much to Liz's chagrin.
Well, I called her that day that I wrote it, and I said I wrote a tribute to your vagina. She was like, really? I was like,
Did you call it that?
and then to give it the title, just because I am the way I am, to give it the title Apocryphal Stories. Just kind of like, you know, no one's ever going to figure this out. But it was funny, like, reading it. Because that's, like, one of those great, you know, like, you know, because, like, I read it, and, like, you know, people...
Yeah.
And I just kind of, like, I just sort of stopped and looked, I'm like, you have no fucking idea what you're applauding.
Just appreciating the disconnect.
Yeah, you really don't know what you're clapping. It's great that you're clapping. Apparently you appreciated maybe the sound of it. But, yeah, there's no way that you would know what it is I'm actually driving at there. Yeah. And now it can be told.
But hey, you know, there's some great stuff going on there regardless.
Thank you. I love it. I think it's fantastic, you know, so... Yeah. You know, I think it works really, really well with everything else. It's really that whole those 5 pieces are so interconnected, thematically and stuff that I think it works really, really, really well. Yeah, it's macrocosmic and microcosmic, and it's all things is all things. You know, yeah. So and then the last one here from 2011, and the 21st piece, which I feel sort of retarded putting.
I think it's right.
But anyway, New Razor. Part of it was written before I did Sunrise on the Cane Islands. I had part of it, and then I finished it off right after Sunrise on the Cane Islands was done. And, or no, I wrote most of it. No, actually I had most of it before, and then I did all the editing on it. And, a couple of years ago, I put up a MySpace profile where I had the age of 12, desecrating Amazing Grace on guitar. And you needed to put a band name, so I came up with The Examples. I was like, well, we are The Examples. We just are. You know, I mean, I don't know. Years ago, I would have been coy about it, but, you know, I just accept it for what it is, you know. It sounds really arrogant still to say it, but I mean, you know, we shine the light so that others may see, I guess. Just as others have shined the light for us. We're not totally arrogant. And, yeah, we are The Examples. And I just wrote the whole thing based around that, you know. And I just think there's really important ideas in there. And that was one of those, I talked about like totemic things where, you know, I know that I have a book. You know, like when I wrote Pornography, I knew I had a book. I could write a book around that, which ended up being Fear. And you know, Do You Believe in Love at First Sight? And When I Never Run Out of Money. I knew that I could base a book around that, and I could build something around that. And New Razor was very much that, because I had the ideas for Your Future, Your Freedom in my head for a long time, and I had outlines of it and stuff. But I didn't have any material. And once I wrote that, I was like, I can fucking make a book around this. This is really strong and really immediate and really, really, really good. And that one got a really good response when I read it too. That was what I opened with. And it seemed to go over really well. You know. Once again, I don't mean to cast aspersions. And then it's hard to pick up on the deeper meanings when you're hearing something for the first time in a live setting. But that was another. I'm like, I don't know if you guys are quite getting this, like why I'm saying what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't know. I don't know if you would be clapping if you, you know. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe you would, but I think once again, I think they like the sound of it, and I don't mean that as a bad thing, because I think it sounds really good, and I think it's memorable and kind of immediate and short and sharp, you know. So I don't know. And when I say we are The Examples, I'm not just talking about like myself or Liz and myself, you know. Mm-hmm. But I'll leave it up to your own imaginations. Not going to get that specific. And then there's this ridiculous essay that I wrote that I went through all hell for. But that's pretty obvious what that's about, so there's no, you know.
No work to be done.
Yeah, you can figure, if you can't figure that out.
You haven't learned to read.
Yeah, you're illiterate. Well, is there anything to add, Tim?
I think you've covered it.
I dare say, yeah.
The book.
Yeah.
Is complete.
Yeah. So, if you've made it through this, you're insane.